Hi, my name is Yannick Dusso, and welcome to this second DVD on digital matte painting. Today I'll be demonstrating the process of combining and integrating existing photography with 3D assets by painting in Photoshop. So basically it's something you could expect walking in on your first day at the job as a matte painter. So with that said, let's get right into it. Okay, so I've got a few elements here with me. First is it's just a slate here. It's just a still frame. Just something I shot in the San Francisco Bay Area in headlands. So we'll assume that that would be moving plate on which I'll start to layer some of the elements I've got here. So this one I've got a bit of a castle-ish 3D model. Just something I rendered really quickly. Spent just a couple of hours putting this together. Mostly interested in the shape, the outline of it, not so much the detail, especially with this lighting condition. It's a late day, I'm going to lose a lot of it, so got a couple passes as well, 2 passes for the castle. One is just a sort of a beauty pass, and the other one is just a key pass. And that I can layer back on using the screen mode while I haze up the rest of the areas that are in the penumbra and umbra. And also here's the sky, which is just a straight sky replacement. Something really traditional. Something you could expect basically walking in on your first day at work. Just straightforward. Putting a couple of elements together. So I'll start first with positioning the sky in there and trying to get the values somewhat right. Again, I'm never really not interested in getting the values right, in the first couple of minutes. I'm just going to lay down the elements that I've got. Probably start to paint here and there, just to get a general feel for the whole thing, and then we sort of glance back at that and make some decisions before I start, zooming in and working the details, towards the final. So I've just positioned the horizon line here so I can line up the sky to where I want it to be. I'm also just going to crop this using your standard 2:3:5 aspect ratio. I mean, I just like it. It's just somewhat more cinematic. It makes the image look nicer, just with the format. So I've created the mask that's sitting back at the top, of my layers up there. So everything I do will be under that. So I'm just gonna color correct this just in a temporary color space again. You can see the sky is obviously blown out, because I've exposed for the land there. Everything goes to white, so I'm going to keep some of that. But again, I just want to add a bit more detail. It's just making the shot a little more interesting, especially with a matte painting shot or sort of establishing shot. You kind of want to make it, or you can, let's put it that way, want to make it a little special, not so much, 100% believable or 100% reality where things wouldn't be as perfect. So you can take, that freedom and just push it a little more than what it would be. It just makes the shot more interesting. And the sky is kind of interesting. That's something I shot again just outside of my apartment. And the lighting condition, it was difficult. I don't know if you really took a good look at it, but it's difficult to tell which way it's coming from. Now, I'm not sure if that's going to work for me or work against me in this case. But I think I picked it just because it was more interesting and not so much standard. And again, I'm trying to make this a little more special, even, I wouldn't say odd, but just a little more interesting, a little more than reality. And things that don't look so real can actually help the shot, So I'm really trying to push that sometimes, and just trying to keep it beautiful. Basically, that's the only goal. So I'm just going to extend the sky here quickly. And you can see I'm really just picking the colors off the sky element. I just layer that back using the same palette, so it's just easy to do it that way. You just color pick and just use your brush and put your brush strokes down. And again, I'm not going to be too worried about the detail in that area, just because I'm probably going to grade, put a gradient in that corner where the sun will, or where the values will be the brightest. So it's interesting to have a left from left to right, or the other way around, gradient, so it's not all even out there. It just gives more direction to the painting. And again, I'll say that a lot, but I'm never really interested in detail so much. All I'm trying to do is get the values down, put the colors down, and then look back and see if that's working. And I'll address the details later, and the composition even later. So I'm basically just trying to see if this will be interesting. Because you never know. You start with a sky, maybe it doesn't work. Maybe what I had in mind, for some reason, there's just a lot of reasons out there why it wouldn't work. But you never know till you try it, and just take chances and risk and look for elements that are interesting and try to build them together. If they don't work, try something else. So it's good to. I've got a huge image bank, just images I'm shooting, mostly out of my balcony, really, back in San Francisco. And just making up a bank of reference material and mostly elements, that I'm just using, just cut and paste. Especially nowadays with matte painting, or more like digital environments, just because it's changed so much with the venue of the computer and paint programs and 3D softwares. The art has changed quite a bit, and especially in a company, it will be a lot of cut and pasting of elements together, and it just gets you there much faster than trying to paint those things together. Of course, there's a lot of value trying to paint from scratch, but just much harder to do. Just more rewarding to use elements, put some things together, and you've got an image in just a couple of hours or in a couple of days, that can stand on film resolution on the big screen, and that's just kind of rewarding. So it's a bit of a cheat, really, but that's just how the technology is. It allows us to do that, so why not? Let's just make the best of it. So I'm just going to haze, just create a layer there, and that's sort of my horizon, where I'm going to layer just a bit of a haze layer and put that in the back. In most cases, I'll be usually blue. Not so much worried about the color right now either. It's just I put it on another layer and just do a color correction on top. And here as well, I'm not just glazing the right-hand side, talking about that transition, having the grad from left to right and get the shot direction. So again, that's on another layer. Not worried about the original color I start from. I just color correct that later. So that's a duplicate of the layer I had earlier. And I might use this just to bring back some of the contrast, especially up there, not so much sitting on the horizon. But I want to bring back just a hint of it. And again, I don't think it's helping the shot in terms of realism, but it just makes it more pretty, so why not? Usually DP would probably just put the filter up there and trying to get that contrast so it doesn't go white. And I don't mind working with a couple of layers, 10, 15 layers even. It just allows me the freedom to come back, and I know that I will, because when I start the painting using elements, I just throw them out there, see how they're going to work, or if it's going to work. And I just see as I go, I just refine the painting, or just even general color direction and then contrast as I go. So I want to keep those on layers. It just gives me that freedom to come back later. Because I always will anyway. I know this for a fact now, so it just saves me a lot of time and sort of merging those together, which is a little dangerous. And again, that could be changes from the director to supervisor. Even though the painting works for you, they might come back with changes, and if you got the layers, maybe it's a very quick fix instead of a repaint. So here I'm just going to make a mask of the of my plate, just a very quick mask, and I'll layer my 3D pass behind that. Now, of course, that's going to be really cute. The edges are really crude, but again, it's just a work in progress, and I'll come back later and fix those edges, probably as I paint on the castle. So here I think I'm just going to repo this a little bit, and I might move some elements later as well. Again, it was done really quickly, and I'm just looking at silhouetting this this element against the sky, trying to get a nice shape, trying to get the towers and houses to sit not so much in a realistic spot, but more in an interesting one. So the tower in the middle there, it might just, it kind of had a nice shape right now where the castle scoops down on the right-hand side of it and sort of sits back up again. So again, it's just about outline. So just look at your micro composition of elements. Just find the best spot where you could position that that element. So I'm hazing this up, of course. The 3D was really raw. I think I just duplicated that same layer and took out all the contrast out of it. And here I'm just doing some just a bit of color changes on it. So I turned the 3D pass as a new layer, as a flat color, and I just put that back on the original pass, and I can dilute this down, with a certain percentage in the opacity, and again I can tweak that, for a little while, trying to get those values right, trying to see if there's enough or if the color's right. And I know I might tweak that later as well, so I'm just going to leave it as a layer for now. And just layered the key pass back on top of that. So that's using the screen mode, because it was sitting on black basically, and that was just rendering, the key light, the sunlight, as a separate pass with no fill light or anything. And again, what I'm most interested in is the silhouette, that edge, the coastline, or those little hills. I just want a nice line that's sitting against the horizon and the clouds. You can sort of tell as well, like I'm not too worried that the painting is still a little bit all over the place in terms of values. The haze, the horizon haze on the left-hand side is way too bright. I'm sure I'm going to bring that down a little later. But again, I'm not worried about it. It's just, here we go. It's just a general, slapping those elements together. And again, I'm just testing to see how my elements are going to work. At this stage, I might still just change the sky and try something different. And again, with the layers, it just gives me that freedom to come back on things. And for me, it's always like a refining process. Basically, I'd start with raw elements, slap them together, and it doesn't feel natural, or it feels a little bit out of control, really. And as I go, I bring all these elements back into control. Here I'm just fixing up some of the edges when I layered the key pass using the screen mode. It tends to bleed a little bit and screen against the sky, which is quite bright as well, so it just gives me this white line. So I'm just going to load the selection of the transparency selection of the beauty pass of the castle, and then just erase away very lightly the edges on the castle. It's one thing with film paintings, you want, especially nowadays as well, that they, there's a saying which is less is more, and I love it. But it's not all supervisors that agree with that, especially not in terms of detail or contrast. They want to ensure that everything is sharp to the pixel. And what I mean by that is that you can, if you have a plate, you're working on a painting, your usual resolution for that plate would be, on film would be, 2048 pixels. That's the minimum resolution you'll probably work on. And of course, this will be projected on a large screen. So I always make sure that I don't have any areas that are blurred, unless it's out of focus, of course. So I just call that sharp to the pixel, basically. So you can zoom in and everything's sharp. Now with this painting, I might take some freedom in terms of sketching on top of this. Again, just doing doing this a little faster than what it would normally take to do. I'd probably spend just about 2 days on this just to make sure everything's tight and everything's the best it can be. Probably try a bunch of different skies till I get the best one in there. Work on the composition, really work on the outline of both the castle and the terrain. Working probably with the sky, so arranging the clouds out there to sort of fit nicely, and again just micro composition, so that everything sort of fits nicely together as shapes. But on this one, I'll mostly try to get just the colors down, trying to get the values down. I'm probably not going to get the perfect composition of elements on this, but just an exercise. I think it's right now it's not that important. Trying to get something that works. This could be probably a 10 painting. For compositors to use, or just a stand-in in the edit. Just a rough sketch, or 10 paintings usually will help, or is needed in the production pipeline and so on. So. So here I'm just fixing that outline, and again it's temporary. I'll probably spend quite a bit of time now still putting some, that small detail in there. I might replace it later, but I do have to zoom in and sort of make something that works. And it's difficult to paint that detail when you're zoomed out full screen. There's a bit of a rule of thumb as well that on film, on screen, you want to be 1-to-1 with your painting, and that's at least how much you're going to see on the screen. So you can sketch from this distance here, just to give yourself more of a composition and an idea of what you're going to do in details later, and just throw down some values and colors. But again, the detail, you kind of have to zoom in and work it to make sure that everything makes sense or that is sharp. So here I'm just going to separate this section here of this castle, just trying to push this a little closer to camera, sitting right behind these that tree line is right there, and just creating a bit of depth, with the element, so it doesn't sit just on the line back there. And this can feel a little cut out just because what's out there, the terrain line just stops and it just becomes bright again, with the horizon. So it's a little tricky. It might feel a little 2D or just a little flatter. But again, that's just the nature of the shot, so not going to worry too much about it. I'm just going to try to add more depth into the castles that I can, but it's really going to read as a 2D shape, a black terrain with castle outline against a bright sky. So again, that's probably why I would spend really the time to make sure that outline is really interesting and works with everything else around it. So I'm just going to layer this castle back against that ridge. You can tell I've got some, I'm not too sure what's out there, some kind of house or bunker area in the headlands up there. There's quite a few. But again, it gives me a great reference, to look at values and colors. And I'm just going to pick from that, pick the color, and lay it back on top of my elements. And I might just leave it there as well. It's real. Why take it out? Unless you have a specific design you need to go by, which is not the case here. I'm just pretty much doing whatever I want. It adds a bit of differences in the architecture, and just that fact that you have different things, different architecture in there, will actually help the realism of it. If you have one thing that's just all the same, it could be what you're after. That could be the design, but again, I found that the more oddities that you add to it, things that you wouldn't expect or wouldn't necessarily think about as an artist, things that happens for a strange reason or something that looks strange, but it just helps it. Maybe not visually, but at least it just helps, having all these different things together as a concept. It makes it more believable because we're used to seeing things that are all different. There's a bit of a house right there, just right in the middle, just under the castle as well. It's got that red color, which is really interesting. I'm sure I'm going to use that later. Probably getting pretty much direct light. And again, I'm probably going to try out some different colors in there. That red, for example. Maybe some ochres, some greens as well that aren't necessarily on the architecture right now. Some cyans as well, just to add, just differences of color in it. And it just, again, creates these differences that has no real purpose, but it just helps the painting. It helps to believe in it. Different materials, perhaps, whatever reason, just visually, you just buy it a little more. I'm just hazing this up a little more. Just creating a bit more depth between that, the tree line and the castle line back there. It's a really cool plate. I really like that area. I mean, it's beautiful. Got those finger ridges that come down to the water. It's just great. You can notice too, I'm actually cheating the scale of this. Looking at those houses that were there. They're much smaller than what I've got in my element. Not too worried about it. I don't want to make the castle humongous, so again, that could play against me in terms of realism or when I believe this at all. But I'm not too worried about the scale of things. If I matched the size of these houses up there, in the plate, with the castle and added all these little houses here and there, it would just be too much. So there is a bit of a scale issue here, but I don't think it's going to work against me, so I'm not going to worry about it. So I'm just trying to bring back some colors on top of that castle element. Is it just picking that red that's right there? Bring back some saturation, basically. Colors that are peeking through for some reason, just through the fill light, through the fill of the sky. And usually whatever I do, I try to push it as far as I can. With this red, for example, I want it to stand out as much as I can make it stand out without it feeling unnatural. So make the best of everything you're putting down. I'll bring up the saturation, brightness of it. And again, if it's on the layer, you can just control that back later. Bring it down if you need to, or just erase it a little, erase it away just a little bit with a soft brush. But just start bold, see what can, just go with it. Really put the colors down and just take it down after. And I find that it's just a little more successful than being too careful about a painting where you don't want to, you're going in just in small percentages of saturation. I'd rather just bring it down than actually building up. So I've got a couple of layers that are sitting on top of what I call the paint layer. So I kind of have to take those off, to color pick basically the color that's right there before I use it. It's a bit of a pain, but again, I do want to control that and that glare, the grad that's coming over the castle from the right-hand side. It's just temporary, just to give me an idea of how it's going to work. It'll be in the final painting, but I don't want to. I want to use the same color throughout. So if it's sitting at the same distance, I'll just use the same color and just use a grad to have that change in it, so I don't hard code the grad in there. Rotating your canvas as well is really going to help. I first started to do it from left to right. Now I do it upside down, and here we are. And again, you just see mistakes, everything that don't work. I'm still a little worried about that sky right now. I'll address that later. But right away, you feel it. You go straight to the area. Of course, you can get used to these views, so don't do it too often. I'll flip the painting, from horizontally a couple times, but I'll be careful of the the vertical, even sideways, 90 degrees. Because it just becomes an abstract image that you're looking at. And all I do is I ask myself, do I believe in this? Does this seem real? Really not about a detail. It's just about the color values. But I always found it works a little better, always is a little more realistic, rotated 90 degrees for some reason. When you bring it back to its original form, you still have to, you still depend on the detail and to make it believable. Yet the brain has to understand somewhat or make up. It has to be able to understand or make up what you're looking at. So even if, let's say, if I just put out some colors and it'd be a big blob, it wouldn't look real. The colors would be real, but I couldn't tell what the subject is. So you still depend on the detail, to bring the realism back into it. But again, it's just giving a couple of hints to the brain, really, to the viewer. Here's a wall, here's a face, face side of a house. Just understand a couple things, and in between that, you can put whatever you want, basically. And again, those colors I was talking before, bring some cyans, greens, and just put as much color as I can, really, without it standing too much. So I'm gonna add, sparse trees in there. And again, I'm only, concerned with the outline or the composition. Or maybe there's an area I'm not too happy with. I'm just gonna cover it up with a tree. So again, it's about micro composition. And your overall composition might change because of that. You're trying to make everything work together in small areas, and it might change. And in the end, you might have to change some of the elements in overall composition. But it's like making a puzzle work, really. You just want to make nice shapes, everything fit together nicely. So I'm probably going to add, just adding more architecture to it. And I'm really not worried about this stuff making a whole lot of sense to the viewer, because I already have my, my basis. Those big faces and those walls up there. So anything in penumbra, I'm just trying to get the color right and scribble away, really. Just adding a bit of highlight again to the trees. Vegetation will always tend to be the darkest tone in your painting as well. And it will retain some of its cool colors, the greens or the blues. But it's nice to bring back in some of those saturated highlights, that are, almost ochres. And it's just so easy to put a highlight here and there. It just, boom, just makes it very interesting, just really sweet. So just making up detail, adding highlights, adding little shapes, just to break up some shapes perhaps that are too simple. you just want a mixture of all that. So maybe some simple shapes and then some more complex stuff. And you want to do it in separate areas, so it's not, again, all the same. You want complex areas and then simple areas, and that, again, that helps the realism of things. And I used to do things just even, trying to find just to do things evenly, and it's just was working against me. And just looking at photographs, and again, that's one of the most important things to do, really. You have to do a digital matte painting. Just look at photographs out there, build your image banks, and look at images and just ask yourself, why is this beautiful? Why did I pick this image? Why does it work? What are the cool things about it? What are the strange things about it as well? And all of these components, you want to implement that again in your matte painting. So here I'm really not worried about what the architecture is or what I'm making up. I'm just looking at values really against the terrain. The composition of the values against the terrain. When I have something that I think it works, I'll just go back in and put a bit more detail to it, but not that much. It's really muted and sitting out there, so it's still nice to have those areas where you just let the brain make up the rest, really. It makes it an easier experience, really, for the viewer. When everything's too sharp, and again, I think it's a bit of a mistake that we're doing these days now, having everything sharp, and especially using 3D elements and photographs, in areas that are really muted, where the haze really takes over, and you think you're seeing detail, but it's mostly an illusion. Sometimes we just create too much of the sharpness of it, and it works, but it feels a little more modern, a little more, I wouldn't say digital, but just not so much traditional feel to it, not as genuine, I'd say. So just checking again with my original background plate, just the progress I've done so far and turning it on and off. I'm going to try to work that ridge right now, adding just a few elements to break it up a little bit. It's such an interesting terrain, it'd be a lot of fun just to make this an entire city, and work out all the logistics of it as a design standpoint. If you make your 3D element, all the walkways and so on, and the ports and stuff, it'd be a lot of fun. It'd be a good exercise to for the actual layout. How would you design? How would that city sit on that terrain? It's quite a challenge, and still making that beautiful and interesting. That's really where the fun is. But for now, I'm just worried about just colors, shapes, values, and all the time I'm just asking myself, do I believe it, or is it pretty? Just zooming out as well is really going to help. analyzing what you've done so far and really seeing it as shapes. It's just called a squint test, really. Squint real hard, and if you buy it, then you're on the right direction. So I might add some foreground element here. Not too sure how this is going to work out. Didn't really plan for that. But again, just picking colors right off the actual plate and trying to get that that red, the roof red color back in there. Not too worried about scale or anything like that right now. Just trying to get the values right. Maybe it's another some kind of tower, guard post or whatever it is. I don't want to make it too dominant. So I'm kind of hoping, even though the size is big, kind of hoping that with the amount of haze that's up there, in terms of storytelling point, your eye goes straight to the castle, or that's where the next scene is going to be, and so you're not confused in those terms. But just as composition, maybe that's going to be more interesting. It's a good thing that I had those, those houses or whatever shapes that in the plate when I shot it. I probably wouldn't have thought of actually putting just white color, as highlights. It's always feels a little strong or sounds a little strong to me. But when I color picked it, it was just pure white. So I might put some of that in there. Very small doses, though. So here's a bit of a cooler color. Whatever it represents, again, it just adds to the color palette. I guess I'm just making air conditioning devices, in the cities. Usually the rooftops are going to be dark. Have that tar. Or, have this light rock rooftop, and you've got these air conditioning machines up there, and they just stand out. They're really white. So in shadow or penumbra, they just will use the fill light of the sky and just become blue. And it just adds so much to it. It just really adds quite a bit. So I'm kind of trying to do the same thing here. Whatever that color would represent, it just still add in the same way. So in that sense, maybe perhaps, it's not so much about the subject. It's just about, or just having the same rules that apply, all throughout, whatever you're doing. Really want to get that. That's that white I was talking about. I just want to get to hit just a few areas with that, bright highlight. You're just trying to break up that wall, really. It's just a little big. Um, Anything could help it. Vines, trees, or more houses, or differences in the bricks, really. It's just a little large right now. It's also making these houses sit a little more. There's just more contrast there, and they come out a little more. I think it's making it a little more interesting. So I'm still kind of working here and there, working left and right. I don't want to concentrate too much on one area. And I've sort of left out, the foreground piece that I'd sketched in just a little earlier. I'll come back to that later. I think something like that could work. So I'll try that a little later. So I'm just going to continue, adding the detail here and there. Just strolling really around the castle area. I always personally like to get at least one section of the painting kind of working. Again, it's just to prove or to find out, is this going to work or not? Is this? I've tried different things, in certain areas, and see if it helps or not. For me, it's always, I'm sure it's different for everybody, but for me, it's really trial and error. I'm trying to, test anything I can think of and see how it works, whatever the reason for it, wherever it comes from, whatever color it has. I just think all these things, the more you can add to it, will help it, of different natures. I hope that's making a bit of sense. So I'm starting to enjoy those nice, just those few highlights, on those walls. That's kind of cool. So if you just do the squint test, they just come out nicely, and still, you squint and they're making shapes. Those highlights are standing out, and the rest just goes to mush, and that detail of highlights that you've put here and there just starts to make shapes. And you're trying to see if that shapes is pleasing, to the eye, whatever the position of the house is, or so it's definitely not about the subject. It's really just about graphic shapes, just to make it soothing. So I kind of like this direction. Just going to save this up for now. Do a bit of a flip. Again, just sitting back and analyzing what I've done so far, and just asking myself if I like the direction, the things that I've tried out, the things that works best. And by the time I'll be done with this, I'll probably forgotten what side, left from right or the other way around I started with. I just always forget. And a couple of occasions where supervisors come in and it's like, "Oh, it's flipped." It's like, "Oh, sorry." People think it's a different painting or a different spot. It's very useful to flip that painting horizontally. Things come out right away, right away. So you want to go a certain distance with it, and when you think you've got a little something, you want to start analyzing this, if you're asking yourself if it's the right direction, flip it, and then things are going to come out right away. Either good things or bad things. There's a lot of detailing. It becomes a little boring perhaps when you do those paintings. It's kind of tedious. Um, that's probably just a time when put on a good pair of headphones and some cool tracks, and just let the let the brush flow. And again, I was saying it's always trial and error for me, so I won't even think much about what I'm doing or what it represents, or sometimes you ask yourself, you want to create little stories. Maybe there's a little house right here, and that's sitting against this wall, and you can hang out in this area, and they would use this for whatever purpose. That's fun to do that as well. It becomes a little more interesting to creating all these little stories. And overall, it does affect, a little bit, a certain percentage anyway. On the helps the painting to become more believable, I guess, to some extent. It just makes it a little more fun, really. So I'm starting to enjoy all these little details. As I squint again, all of those things sticking out, standing out, and there's an important aspect of it, which you want to create complexity into it, or the illusion of complexity anyway. Whatever the detail represents, I was saying, those areas, you want to work up some of the areas and add complexity to it. And one thing I'm not going to do here today, but anything from using or just layering textures. I think I'm going to show this in a later DVD. But you can layer some any sort of texture, really, rock textures, anything that has texture, whatever it is, back onto the painting, just left and right. Really, just lay it on top. Erase parts that are a little strange looking, but again, it's going to help. Really going to add complexity to it, and again, just makes it more believable. And again, if you're starting from 3D elements, it's also fun to do the same thing, creating these little stories, put a house here and creating little things that would make sense, as a city layout kind of thing. That could be a lot of fun. You could do it in 3D, in a package, or just sketch it back into the painting later. So for this example, I'm not too worried about the design of it, so I'm just making it up as I go. So I'm not stuck with the 3D element and spent all that time really, laboring. these renders that I'm not going to see that much really. Again, it's just going to give the illusion of complexity. So it's not about the subject of the detail. Just creeping back some of the highlights back in there. And again, just doing a squint test, as I paint this, I'm half the time of the painting, I've got my eyes halfway closed. Turning my head sideways and all these little weird things. Just to get it just gives you a better sense of what you're doing. You want to analyze what you're doing, or just have a look at it in a different way, or as many ways as you can. Again, just to try out different things, really, to come up with ideas or anything. It could be just you've painted on this layer for a little bit, and then you just try a color correction on it, and just switch the colors around a little bit and see what that does. So again, in a work environment, this plate is something I shot as a still frame. But you'd probably get a sequence or just a still frame to paint on. And whether you do the compositing of these elements or a compositor does it, maybe there's some other elements that they're adding to it, animated elements that another department is doing. So you'd be handing this off in separate layers, really, or just with masks. And of course, a compositor would place back what you've painted using your mask back onto this plate, with having the grass moving and the water moving. So just looking back at what I've done so far, searching for ideas, really, just to what else I could add to this. It's probably cool to add some stuff in here in this section. Would probably make sense, or could make sense, to have some of these buildings come down to the to the water. And mainly all that's doing is just helping integrating that tower element that you started from into the actual landscape of it. So again, really not worried about detail there. Just about values. Trying to get that red rooftop color again working in this space of the painting. And again, this is trial and error, so I might take this out later if it doesn't look good. If it looks better without it, I'll just erase it. It's really fun to add these little highlights, though. You don't even need, you can just apply them straight to the plate, and you don't need another wall area or like a filled area, something within shadow. Just add little highlights here and there, little nits. And again, it adds to the complexity and just creates shapes. It just makes the viewer or the brain, let the brain go loose a little bit and create that city for you without having that detail. And again, it's more pleasing. It's just a softer way to read the image. So you don't have to force, the detail to the viewer. You let him go loose on it. So again, I rarely have a planned direction for my brush or what I'm going to do or what it's going to be. Almost to a point where, I'll see what the painting will become. I'm sure that's different for everybody, but I just let myself go with it. And again, with some good tracks, you can be in good shape. It'd be nice to have some houses just on that ledge right there. So of course, on everything I paint, on layers, so I can load back, or and extract those elements, or to give them to other people in the pipeline with those masks. I just extract the masks and publish the elements to the rest of the pipeline. You can notice as well there's a lot of noise in the painting or in the plate. Of course, it's digital noise. It's not something you would get with film. But I'm not going to worry trying to put this noise back into it, because this would technically be a sequence. That noise needs to be animated with the rest. So I'll let the compositors do that, really. And they've got much better tools to do it. But as a still frame, if I was just doing this in Photoshop, for example, I just add a noise function back on top, and it's just going to help integrate it a little more. I'm a bit of a fan for compression, in terms of image compression. It just helps, again, it creates, just mushes the detail, really, into values, and it's just a little softer to read, to look at. I wouldn't go as far as saving it as a JPEG and then bring it back in, but that's usually a joke that I make. So I've got a nice little populated waterfront up there. As I zoom back again, I might see some stuff that I just a little too much, and I'm not really happy with, stand out a little too much. I'll just erase that away. Do the flip test again. Looking at the same area. And this section could use something as well. You'd probably expect to see something there. It's a nice opportunity as well to have those positive shapes, the highlights against the shadow area there. And really all I'm doing is breaking up that shape. you'll see me quite often just trying to get the right color, you know, in there off the the color picker there, or the color swatch. Might take a few tries. What I'll do as well, usually I'll, so there is a red rooftop, I'll just pick a red, layer it back, and just make a brush stroke on top of the plate, but just with a bit of a transparency to it, so I won't press as hard. And that color is going to blend in with that plate, and I'll just pick the result and then undo that brush stroke. So I've got the resulting color, which is a mix basically. I'm just mixing, the tube, the color out of the tube with the plate. But you do want to be careful. You do want to retain saturation in it. So I always say, try to, like I was saying earlier, you want to push as far as you can and then just bring it back down later. So with the mixing, sometimes I just got to make sure I keep the right saturation. Because it just could come to a gray, it's just a little less interesting, or just a bit of a mud color. Trying to stay away from that. Again, just doing these squinting tests and looking at my shapes. Positive shapes against negative shapes. And just trying to find out if there's a nice uneven balance. Just flipping the plate back and forth, seeing the progress. Again, just asking myself, does it look more interesting than before? That glare is probably still a little too strong. I might just erase some of that. Yeah, that feels a little better now. Still felt a little too bright. Just very gently, just erasing, soft brush, light pressure. And it's just readjusting what I've done earlier as I go. And I'll make these overall changes, throughout the entire process. Creating a bit more of a silhouette. You do want to be careful though, because it will make that outline come forward. It might flatten out the perspective. So I just want to be a little careful with that. kind of pleased with the results so far. Again, I'm not spending a whole lot of time thinking about what I'm doing, or didn't spend a whole lot of time creating the city element. So there's a bit of that, engineering phase that's missing to it. Just more as an exercise. I think it's a fun little straightforward painting to do. And having the subject matter, sitting back there, it's just a little more easy. I don't have to worry about detail that much. You can say don't have a whole lot of brushes. Just kind of what, 4 or 5 really. I'm sure you could do a lot more with the standard brushes that comes with the software, but it's the thing with digital painting. It's difficult to create the illusion of detail or texture with digital painting versus using a real brush. So that's the only part I'm a little disappointed. I'm sure things will get much better. I mean, they're already starting to become the procedural softwares and so on, having much smarter brushes. But it's always a little too tedious for me to having to zoom in really and just use the 1 pixel brush and work every detail in there. So just coming back to my little foreground piece there. I'm trying to play around, see and position that thing. Now this piece, this element's really going to be muted with the glare. So I'm probably not going to spend that much time working the details. It's only because of the lighting condition now. If this was front lit, it'd be a little harder to do. Take much more time, so that's something I could do in 3D as well, having those textures in there so I don't have to paint with that 1 pixel brush, all these little details. But in this case, I think I'll probably get away with just creating the illusion of detail. And again, just with the proper colors, proper values, I might just get away with it. Just picking colors off the plate again. It's really low contrast. I'm mainly going to concentrate on color differences to create those shapes. So probably anything of the same material will just blend in as one shape. Then break that apart with a different color. probably the only contrast that I've got here is just those trees. Really, like I was saying, they're usually just the darkest value in there. Just trying to haze this up a little more. Probably just going to help, really. And I was saying I don't want to make this too predominant. It'll definitely stand out as a shape. That's not where the story, or that's not where I want the story to take place. You can see here I'm kind of working that edge just a little bit, not throughout the entire corner of that edge, but just in some areas to, again, it's those lost and found edges, really, and just to let the brain make the rest. It's just finding the right spot to create a bit of a contrast difference. Those are fun to play with. They're a little more tricky though. Definitely a lot of fun. So, the complexity I was talking earlier in the background on the castle, this foreground piece is a completely different concept, really. I don't want the complexity of it. I'm going to keep things really loose and just add snippets of detail or sharpness, just a little bit. But I do have to keep in mind this would be projected on a really large screen with a whole lot of people looking at it. So you want to make sure that will stand in correctly. So this is definitely the less is more approach. Again, shedding a bit of contrast with those trees or foliage. It's still standing out a little too much, especially the top part of it. I'm kind of just reviewing some of the contrast I had in there, just glazing over it. Coming back for a bit more detail. And again, just picking the colors off the plate. And with this, in this case, I'm not too worried about losing the saturation. just adding just enough detail for the viewer to understand what he's looking at, but just in some areas again. You'll see me undo those brush strokes. I mean, basically I have my, I'm painting from the right hand, and I've got the left hand on the undo button. And although I do it kind of quickly, I'll definitely do a couple of strokes, try a stroke. If it's not what I kind of had in mind, I'll just undo that again and redo it till I get it. Just really quickly though. So you'll see stuff I just paint, and then it goes away, and I try again until I get it right. Now here's a bit of a trick. Just created a new layer, and I'm just going to fill this with black. Just render out a lens flare on it. Figure out the general direction of the lens flare. Of course, I don't want to use it so much as a flare, but more as a glare. And I'm just going to glaze this back on top of that tower, because it's still standing out a little too much. So using the screen mode on that layer, I can just sort of reposition it, scale it up and down, stretch it. And it just has that nice, cut palettes to it. Greens and ochres and cyans. And again, that adds to the palette complexity, and again, just makes it more believable and prettier, which is just what I'm trying to do. So of course you don't want the classic circles in there, especially in this, because the sun's not even into frame. So I'm just going to blur this out and use it to glaze over those colors. And I tend to do this with pretty much every painting I've got. Again, talking about that gradient, from left to right, having a contrast difference there just gives it direction. And that's just going to enhance it. Of course, I want this really subtle, but it will help. I'm still feeling it's a little too contrasty, or it's just standing out a little too much. So I'm just doing an overall color correction on that tower. Scaling down some of that detail. And again, I'm just undoing that. If I notice there, I just scale down. It made a soft selection. And just scale down that element a little bit. And then just hit the undo button back and forth to see before and afters. And that's really how I make those decisions. Or with color. I'll try blue. I'll try to color correct an element. Try a certain color. And you just hit the back and forth button to undo. And you just determine, well, was it better before or is it better now? And again, that's part of the trial and error process. So I've scaled this down a little bit as well. It was still a little too predominant for me. It should only be as a bit of a bonus to the image, but Shouldn't have importance to it. I can just add a bit of detail, just that, using that contrast right there. It's just interesting to do just a couple of brushstrokes and whatever it is, a handrail or post or whatever that is. Just adds a bit complexity to it. And again, just in certain areas. I'm not even sure how this tower and these houses are, sort of sitting together, or how they were built together, and not so worried about that. Again, just looking at the 2D shape, really. That's kind of something, if I did in 3D, I'd realize my perspective's all wrong and such, but and I'm not too worried with it. I think we're going to get away with this, just with the nature of the, the lighting scenario. Should at least probably through a couple of perspective lines, but it should be fine. Again, if this was a 3D piece that I rendered out just like the other castle, in this case, I wouldn't want to paint on top of the textured or the textures to take away that detail in most of the areas again. But in this case, sketching it is just more rewarding because it's so forgiving. So it's really muted. You barely make out what's there. It's a good opportunity just to put those kicks right there, just along that ledge. And again, fewer kicks is better than more. So it's kind of important just to put in the right spot. And again, through trial and error, I'll try different spots, come back to it, erase it, try something else. I kind of tend to believe that there's almost a perfect spot for everything. So you kind of want to try out different things, and with the options that you've got, find the best place to that highlight or put a bit of contrast or color difference or whatever it is. And within that micro composition, you want to establish those sweet spots. That's kind of starting to work. I might spend a bit more time on this, but can notice a bit of the scale problem that I'm having, especially in this foreground piece, if you compare it to the rocks down below in the ocean. There is a bit of a noticeable scale difference there. Something I gotta watch out for if there's a true, a real painting. So I pretty much have all my elements in there now. I'm kind of, just continuing doing the sweeping across the paintings and looking at edges and shapes and lines and just adding to it. I'm using that red rooftop quite a bit. I'm here trying to get that sort of white wall and shadow. And I can really tell it's just working a bit of in an area. Throw down a couple of colors in there and then sort of look at something else and then come back to it later. So there is a bit of an overall progress. So that's tower sitting a little better now with the flare that we've added, and then now there's a definite perspective direction, especially with that foreground piece. There's three different spots really that your eye look at, especially in this angle. From where your eye's going from left to right. It's definitely a storytelling, situation or perspective. It just helps. So, of course, you could add a slight push in later, and it's kind of there's a whole level of playing with the how the viewer is going to read this. You can just have a lot of fun with that. I'm just going to try to put that. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I was talking earlier, it felt a little 2D, a little too flat. And it was the nature of the shot. But especially in the end of the painting, I'm still gonna try some overall changes. Still trying to narrow and see if it's better or not. That's got an interesting feel to it. Now I wonder why I didn't think about this before. And again, with this haze, like I've got a couple of options. I'm just sort of trying out. You know, I can erase most of it at the very end of that tip over there, or erase where the castle meets with the rest of the terrain. I'll just try both options, really. That's got a nice feel. Just analyzing again, seeing where I could change some stuff. I'm just trying to think of anything else I could add to it. Yeah, I'm just turning on and off the paint layers here just to see what kind of progress I've made. It's definitely coming together. Still not 100% comfortable with that foreground element. I mean, I'll leave it in there. It's a little predominant. And again, that's something you could show as an option, you know, to your supervisor, or to the visual effects supervisor or director. You know, just show it with and without. Just let him pick. I usually like to see a couple of versions and then make a decision on that. Just going back on some of the detail again. You know, I'm kind of happy with the with how it's gone so far, and I could probably call this one, you know, ready for what I wanted to show on the in this exercise. I'll just keep going a little bit more and see what I can come up with. And when I squint again, I'm really enjoying those that red color, you know, with the light ochres, and it's got a nice feel to it, mixed up with the greens and the foliage around it. Again, trees are your best friend, really. You want to hide something or something's not working out. It's pretty much just a flat color, not a whole lot of detail. Like I said, it's mainly always dark. And it just integrates, you know, that element into the terrain a lot more. It'd probably be a little harder to have this castle sitting right against the grass, the short grass, because there'd be quite a bit of a clash there, and it could feel a little unnatural. So again, it's just about making it pleasing to the viewer. So not making it harsh. Just taking a look back again and turning on all my all those glare layers and haze. Just doing general color correction on that layer again, just see what I can come up with. I'll basically try the entire spectrum, switch that hue from left to right, and try to find what color works best. So just doing a really soft selection right now on that haze layer, and just boosting up the saturation because it's on fairly lightly in terms of opacity. Just doing it before and after again, just with the undo button. Subtle changes, but it just feels nicer. Adding just a bit more detail there. I'm still not entirely happy with that piece. But overall, I think it's working. And that sky certainly stands out, but a bit of an interesting way. So I'm kind of, I like what it's doing. Now it's not something I would expect, basically. Especially over ocean, they usually just sit way back there or come right up to the coast. And now it's sort of sitting halfway there, so logically it probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but I'm not in this for the logic, so. It just makes it more interesting. Again, just overall slight tweaks. And you sort of get used to what you're, to the painting after a while. So it becomes a little more difficult to judge because your eye's not as fresh to it. So it's much easier for someone to just walk in the room and ask them, what do you think? How do you feel? Does anything pop out? I do that quite a bit. I want first reaction. Not worried about detail again. Just is this reading right? Do you feel right about it? I'm just hazing this back a little more again. That's working better. I'll just make the city come down a little further down. Blend in more, a little more to the plate. And again, all I'm doing, is just making that ridge, pop out a little more. And that might work for me or against me. It might just throw that entire ridge way back there where the castle is sitting. And it's still probably important to keep some relationship, with the ridge that's sitting in front. So again, you want to create some contrast on that outline again, but also having certain areas where it just blends together. So it's these lost and found edges. Yeah, that might work. Yeah, it's got a nice feel to it. It breaks that line a little bit. And I've been enjoying those areas where those walls or faces are just receiving direct sunlight. Turn back those layers on. I'm just erasing some of that haze that I threw back there earlier. Had a bit of a rough edge. Yeah, here we go. Just a couple of hints again. It's just a good opportunity to do it. It's difficult not to overdo it. So, I try to keep in mind, again, less is more. Just a couple of nicks, a couple of hints, right? A couple of highlights, and just let it be. Again, just trying to push a couple more highlights in there, just on that outline, just a hint of it. Sort of backlit grass, translucency. Again, it's really easy to go overboard with this and put way too much. I'm not sure what get this in reality, but it just adds a little more to it. So I'm kind of getting near completion here, but I just keep going, just strolling through the painting and just looking at all the areas. And I also know that whenever I think I'm done, I also need to keep going just a little more to get it there. Or at least in front of supervisors. Again, just working at these highlights on the foliage. It's a good opportunity to have that really saturated, ochres and greens. Again, it just adds to the palette. This lighting scenario just before magic hour, you want it to sort of to have a bit of a beauty feel to it. Just having this very diffused light. Definitely making my job easier to have everything a little more muted. Just a midday painting would be much more work. Because you would need just that amount of detail. You would see that detail everywhere, so it's a little more difficult to create the illusion of it. I think I'd actually loved seeing this in motion. I wish I had a real plate. Let me see how it feels. It's funny enough, the last 3 workplaces I've been at, last 3 employers, first day walking in, I had to put some kind of castle onto some kind of mountain. It just seems to be a traditional, maybe somewhat of a test even. I thought it was pretty funny. So I decided, why not? We've all done the castle on the mountain thing. Let's just do it once more. Still trying to integrate that thing properly in there. Just working the bounce slide on that dome up there. Probably made of a different material, or can be made of a different material. Again, if it's a good opportunity to make it a different material, then just do it. It reflects more blue out there and helps to make it more believable. There's no reason why you wouldn't do it. So it's almost like finding excuses for things to do that's going to help the painting. Just a bit more foliage in there. Still having a bit of contrast issue. It's funny, although there's no contrast, it's just really difficult to get just the right amount. Just going to try to pick the red rooftop color again. Get a bit of a backlit, or just some kind of edge that's catching the light. And you saw me, I was just zoomed out, and I just sort of sketched it in just to see where it could go. Undid that, zoomed in again, and then went in for the detail. It's kind of easy to keep going forever on the painting. You do need to stop at one point. And there's always things you could change, especially like I was saying, the micro composition. You can just kind of waste or lose yourself a bit in there. It's a little endless. So you want to just let it go at some point. And again, just ask for feedback. Ask for your buddies, for first-time viewers. It's really the best critique that you could get, best advice. Because that's only, that's how people are going to see it, really. You're going to see it for 2-3 seconds, and that's it, then it's gone. So you want, how does the first impact feels like? By the time you spend a couple of hours, a couple of days, a couple of weeks even, you've sort of lost that vision. So you're mainly just doing the quality control, really, but you want to make sure, in the early stage that you're happy with the general direction of it. Like this one would be a good example again for, if I'm happy with the colors and the values and the time of day, and I might just go back into 3D land again and just really work in, some of the layout of the city and try to figure out, just have fun again with it, and making this a little more complex in terms of engineering of the city. Design for the terrain, basically. As of right now, I'm just layering stuff on top of each other, which is fine too. I'm kind of glad with the painting. It's kind of working. bit of a quality control pass, making sure everything's fine. You don't have some bad matte edges. You know, better to discover mistakes now than the theater. So here's a bit of another trick. I'm just doing a grad here, circular grad, and just because I'm a little unhappy with the some of the contrast in there, I'm using the lighten mode. So it just really just brings everything together. It's basically replacing values of the painting that are darker than this lighten layer or lighten color layer. And I kind of brought it back nicely together. Again, very subtle, but I'm starting to have a couple of layers. I'm going to fix up those clouds. I kind of almost forgotten that. Done a quick pass on them. Probably doesn't need much more though. You know, the glazing that we've been doing, it's definitely forgiving. The clouds are a little tricky sometimes. I mean, you want to start, you can start with a good reference, like I did in this case, and there's a certain chaotic pattern that happens for a whole bunch of reasons that I don't really understand. But it's just something you can notice and start seeing, that pattern repeating in some scenarios. In this case, I'm just looking at what are the formation of the clouds on the right-hand side, just sort of replicating that, really. And that's all it needed. So one last look at it. I like that area, it's kind of nice. That hazing we did on that last ridge really helps. It just created much more depth into it. That infamous foreground piece, it's kind of working now. You really feel that depth, from with that perspective, looking at the different towers. Just gonna do it back and forth. Just undoing, deleting the plate layer, and just see what kind of progress I made. Cool.